Guys who dated someone out of your league, how did you do it? I was 22, working at a coffee shop near campus when she walked in. Delilah Morrison, the kind of beautiful that makes you forget how to operate basic machinery. I literally broke the espresso machine mid-order because I was staring at her perfect bone structure and designer handbag that probably cost more than 4 months of my rent combined. She was everything I wasn't. Trust fund kid from generational wealth that stretched back to the city's founding families, drove a pristine white BMW that looked like it had rolled off a showroom floor that morning, wore clothes with designer labels I couldn't pronounce without butchering every syllable. Her family owned Morrison Industries, which meant they controlled half the commercial real estate downtown and had their influence embedded in every major development project that had shaped the city's skyline over the past 3 decades. I lived in a 350-square-foot studio apartment directly above Mario's laundromat, where the industrial washing machines ran until 3 a.m., and the pervasive smell of detergent and fabric softener had permanently embedded itself in every piece of clothing I owned. I survived on generic ramen that cost 29 cents per package, discount peanut butter sandwiches made with bread from the day-old bakery section, and the sheer determination to finish my mechanical engineering degree without drowning in student loan debt that was already approaching the cost of a luxury car. But somehow, against all logic and social probability, she kept returning to our little coffee shop squeezed between a dry cleaner that perpetually smelled like industrial chemicals and a used bookstore where the owner's ancient cat served as an unofficial greeter who judged every customer's literary taste. Same order every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 2:15 p.m., with the precision of someone whose entire life ran according to carefully maintained schedules. Grande oat milk latte, extra shot, no foam, heated to exactly 140 degrees because anything hotter scalded her tongue and anything cooler tasted flat and disappointing. I memorized that order like it was a mathematical formula crucial to my graduation, practiced making it perfect during every 15-minute break, timing the steaming process down to the second and adjusting the espresso extraction until I could produce her drink with the consistency of a precision manufacturing process. My coworkers thought I was developing an unhealthy obsession with some rich girl who was clearly slumming it for the novelty factor before returning to her natural habitat of country clubs and charity luncheons. Tony, my shift supervisor who'd been working coffee shops for 17 years and considered himself an expert on customer psychology, shook his head every time he watched me perfect another practice latte. "She's gonna get bored of this place real fast," he warned while cleaning the espresso machine with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen too many broken hearts caused by customers who disappeared without explanation. Rich girls like that, they collect experiences like other people collect coffee shop loyalty stamps. You're just another story she'll tell at her fancy dinner parties about that time she dated someone from the working class. But there was something genuinely different about the way she smiled when I handed her that perfectly crafted latte. Not the polite, practiced smile you give service workers to demonstrate your superior breeding and social consciousness, but something authentic that reached her eyes and suggested she actually saw me as a human being, rather than just another employee performing a function. The way she lingered at the counter, even when there was a line of impatient customers behind her, asking detailed questions about my engineering classes with what seemed like genuine curiosity, rather than patronizing interest designed to make herself feel magnanimous. Actually listening when I got carried away, explaining the mathematical beauty of thermodynamic principles, or the elegant physics behind structural load calculations, or the way a perfectly designed mechanical system could solve real-world problems with efficiency that bordered on art. She knew things about structural engineering and construction principles that surprised me, demonstrating familiarity with concepts most people found boring or incomprehensible. It turned out her family's real estate empire meant she'd grown up surrounded by architectural blueprints, engineering reports, and construction project meetings, even though she'd never pursued the technical side of the business herself. After 3 weeks of increasingly comfortable conversations about coffee bean origins, sustainable farming practices, fair trade economics, and my upcoming finals in advanced materials science and structural analysis, I finally gathered enough courage to ask her out. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the pen properly, let alone write legible numbers on her cup without creating smears that looked like abstract art. She examined those messy digits for what felt like several geological epochs, probably trying to decipher my nervous handwriting while I stood there sweating through my work shirt and wondering if it was possible to die from embarrassment in front of witnesses. "Sure," she said with a smile that could have powered the entire metropolitan electrical grid during peak summer air conditioning demand. "But I get to choose where we go." My stomach dropped like an elevator with severed cables. This was the moment of truth. She'd select some exclusive establishment with dress codes that required clothing I couldn't afford, even with 3 months' worth of saved tips, where they'd take one look at my thrift store button-down shirt and escort me out through the service entrance to avoid embarrassing the legitimate patrons. Instead, she chose Chez Laurent, the most expensive French restaurant in the entire city, the kind of culinary temple where they don't print prices on the menu, because if you need to ask about cost, you definitely don't belong among the clientele who dine there regularly. The kind of establishment where the water glasses probably cost more than my monthly textbook budget, and the waitstaff spoke in hushed, reverential tones about wine vintages and preparation techniques that I'd only encountered in movies about wealthy people living lives I couldn't properly imagine. I spent my entire liquid assets that night. Every last dollar of the $347 I'd managed to accumulate through my coffee shop wages, weekend tutoring sessions with struggling freshman engineering students, and occasional construction jobs when my back could handle the physical demands. That money was supposed to sustain me until my next financial aid disbursement arrived in 7 weeks. but it was worth every penny to watch her laugh at my terrible jokes about hydraulic engineering principles and my completely serious analysis of the structural integrity of the soufflé we shared for dessert. "You're absolutely nothing like the men I usually date," she told me over that dessert, which probably cost more than my typical weekly grocery budget of generic brands and markdown produce from the clearance section. Is that a positive development or a complete disaster? It's the most refreshing thing that's happened to me in years. She painted detailed pictures of her world that night, describing charity galas where people casually spent thousands of dollars on auction items they'd never use, exotic vacations to destinations I'd only seen in travel documentaries, a lifestyle where money wasn't something you actively worried about but something that simply existed in the background like oxygen or gravity, or the basic assumption that your credit card would never be declined for insufficient funds. I shared stories about my reality with equal honesty, working 2 jobs simultaneously to afford textbooks that cost more than some people's monthly car payments, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 3 consecutive nights each week because protein was expensive and I needed sustained energy for marathon study sessions. The genuine pride I felt when I aced a particularly challenging thermodynamics examination, knowing every point represented hours of studying under harsh fluorescent lights in the 24-hour library, while other students were out partying or sleeping in comfortable beds. She listened to my experiences like they were the most fascinating narratives she'd ever encountered, asking thoughtful follow-up questions about concepts she didn't understand, genuinely wanting to know what it felt like to build something with your own hands, to solve complex problems that had actual real-world applications beyond academic theory. 3 months into our relationship, she insisted I meet her parents at their country club. The Riverside Club, where memberships weren't purchased through normal commercial transactions, but inherited like family heirlooms or genetic characteristics, passed down through generations of families whose wealth predated the city's modern development. The waiting list was rumored to span decades, and even then, acceptance required personal recommendations from multiple existing members, plus background investigations more thorough than most government security clearances. I borrowed a suit from my roommate Kevin, who stood 3 inches taller and carried 20 pounds more muscle than my engineering student frame, leaving me looking like an adolescent wearing his father's formal wear. I spent the entire morning practicing conversational small talk in my bathroom mirror and mentally rehearsing strategies for not accidentally touching anything in their facility that looked like it cost more than my semester's tuition and fees combined. Her father, Richard Morrison, embodied every stereotype about generational wealth I'd ever encountered in movies or literature. The perfectly tailored suit that probably required more money than my car's total Blue Book value, the gold watch that caught and reflected light, like it had been engineered specifically for that purpose. The way he held his whiskey tumbler, like he was posing for a magazine advertisement about successful men making important business decisions in oak-paneled rooms. "So," he said after the obligatory firm handshake that felt more like a physical assessment than a social greeting, "what exactly do you do with your time when you're not serving coffee?" "I'm completing my degree in mechanical engineering with a focus on sustainable energy systems," I replied, trying to project confidence I absolutely didn't possess while standing in a room where individual pieces of artwork probably cost more than most people's entire houses. He laughed with genuine amusement, not a polite chuckle, but the kind of reaction you'd have to an unexpectedly funny joke. How absolutely quaint and refreshing. Delilah's previous boyfriend was pre-law at Harvard University. Full academic scholarship, naturally, based on exceptional LSAT scores and undergraduate performance. His family has been practicing corporate law for 4 consecutive generations. They handle most of our company's legal work, actually, including several major acquisition deals we completed last year. That's when her mother, Patricia Morrison, leaned forward with a smile that could have frozen liquid steel during the casting process. "Tell me, dear, what exactly are your long-term intentions regarding our daughter's future?" The way she emphasized intentions made it absolutely clear she'd already mentally categorized me as temporary entertainment, a rebellious phase Delilah would eventually outgrow once she regained her social senses and remembered her family obligations. I represented curiosity, perhaps even an act of defiance, but certainly not serious relationship material worthy of long-term consideration. But Delilah grabbed my hand underneath the starched white tablecloth with enough force to crack knuckles, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my palm with intensity that suggested years of practice defending her personal choices against parental pressure. "His intentions are absolutely none of your business, Mother," she said with steel in her voice I'd never heard during our previous conversations, the kind of tone that implied extensive experience standing up to family interference in her personal decisions. The tension at that table could have been measured with precision scientific instruments. Her father's jaw tightened in a way that was almost imperceptible, but suggested significant self-control. Her mother's smile became even more frigid, if such a thing was physically possible according to the laws of thermodynamics. "Delilah, darling," her mother said in the carefully modulated tone people use when they're exercising tremendous restraint. "Perhaps we could have a brief private conversation to clarify a few things about family expectations." "Absolutely not," Delilah replied, her grip on my hand intensifying. "Whatever you want to discuss, you can say in front of him. We don't maintain secrets from each other." Her father cleared his throat with the natural authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding corporate boardrooms filled with people whose professional livelihoods depended entirely on his continued approval and financial support. The Morrison family has maintained certain standards and expectations for 5 consecutive generations. We don't make investments in ventures with uncertain returns or questionable long-term viability prospects. He was discussing me like I was a potential stock purchase under consideration for their diversified investment portfolio, analyzing my risk-to-reward ratio and projected performance over time. The remainder of that dinner passed like a fever dream of forced politeness and conversational landmines disguised as innocent questions. Every inquiry felt like a comprehensive examination I was predetermined to fail. Every answer I provided seemed to confirm their worst assumptions about my suitability as potential family material worthy of serious consideration. That night, she drove us back to my cramped apartment in complete silence. The BMW's leather seats and advanced climate control system feeling like luxury accommodations I'd never be able to provide through my own efforts. We climbed the narrow staircase past the laundromat's industrial equipment and settled on my second-hand couch purchased from a garage sale, eating Chinese takeout from paper containers, while her expensive car sat parked between a deteriorating pickup truck and a motorcycle with questionable mechanical reliability. "I need to tell you something critically important," she said, setting down her chopsticks with the kind of precision that suggested extensive mental rehearsal of this exact moment, planning exactly how to deliver information that would fundamentally alter our relationship dynamics. My heart ceased functioning as a blood circulation organ and became instead a solid mass of anxiety occupying space in my chest cavity. This was the inevitable moment when she'd realized she could do infinitely better than a financially struggling engineering student with calloused hands and ambitions that exceeded his bank account balance by several orders of magnitude. "My trust fund?" she continued, staring at the inexpensive coffee table I'd assembled using instructions translated from Swedish and basic tools borrowed from my neighbor. "It comes with very specific conditions that my family has never bothered explaining to any of the men I've dated previously." I nodded silently, waiting for the inevitable breakup speech wrapped in gentle explanations about family responsibilities and social obligations she couldn't realistically ignore without severe long-term consequences. "I have to marry someone from Dad's pre-approved list before my 25th birthday, or I forfeit every single penny of my inheritance permanently." Those words impacted me like a physical blow from construction equipment. Pre-approved list, sons of Dad's business partners and associates, families with compatible wealth levels and social standing, people who understand the complex responsibilities that accompany our level of generational financial resources. She paused, finally meeting my eyes directly. People like Harrison Wellington. Harrison, the Harvard pre-law golden boy she'd mentioned casually during previous conversations, always with a slight expression of annoyance that I'd interpreted as mild irritation, but now realized might have represented resignation to inevitable circumstances. I'd seen his photographs buried deep in her social media archives. Tall, conventionally handsome in ways that suggested excellent genetics and expensive orthodontic work. The type of man who probably excelled at lacrosse and had never experienced genuine financial anxiety during his entire privileged existence. "I'm currently 23, she continued, her voice diminishing with each word. "That gives us exactly 2 years before my family expects an official engagement announcement to someone they consider suitable marriage material, to someone who definitely isn't me." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes that refracted light from my discount lamp in ways that created tiny prismatic effects. "So why are you explaining this to me now instead of 6 months ago when we started becoming serious about each other?" "Because I'm completely exhausted from living their predetermined life according to their established rules," she said with sudden intensity that transformed her entire physical demeanor. "I want to make my own decisions and choose my own future path, even if it means sacrificing everything they've provided since the day I was born." The full magnitude of her statement hit me in successive waves of realization. $50 million. That was the approximate figure she'd mentioned once during a casual conversation about her family's accumulated wealth. Her inheritance, currently invested in carefully managed portfolios designed to grow through compound interest and strategic diversification. She was proposing to abandon more money than I could properly conceptualize to build a life with someone who existed paycheck to paycheck and considered dinner at chain restaurants a significant financial decision. Delilah, that's completely irrational. You can't abandon your entire future security for what exactly? For love? For the opportunity to construct something authentic instead of maintaining something hollow and predetermined? She stood up, pacing the limited space between my kitchenette and living area that was smaller than her childhood bedroom's walk-in closet. "Do you have any realistic idea what my life resembles if I follow their master plan? Marry Harrison, produce 2. 5 statistically appropriate children, host charity luncheons where I smile and pretend to care deeply about causes I've never personally experienced, and gradually transform into my mother while my husband works 80-hour weeks at his father's prestigious law firm." I'd met her mother during that country club dinner. The comparison wasn't flattering to anyone involved in this conversation, but $50 million represents generational security, Delilah. That's financial stability for your children and their children's children. That's also a prison sentence disguised as privilege and opportunity, she replied with conviction. I've observed what that level of wealth does to people over time, how it traps them in lives they never actively chose, relationships they never genuinely wanted, careers that make them profoundly miserable but maintain their expected social standing and family reputation. For the following year, we became completely inseparable despite the approaching deadline that hung over our relationship like a sword, suspended by increasingly deteriorated threads. I worked double shifts at the coffee shop, accepted weekend construction jobs that left my back aching and my hands covered in cuts and calluses, all to afford dating experiences that matched even a small fraction of the lifestyle she'd known since childhood. She began shopping at thrift stores for the first time in her life, learning to discover designer pieces hidden among racks of donated clothing from people who'd grown tired of expensive purchases. She cooked meals in my kitchen that barely accommodated one person comfortably, let alone two adults trying to prepare food simultaneously, discovering genuine enjoyment in creating something with her own hands, rather than simply ordering from restaurants or relying on household staff to handle meal preparation. We discovered middle ground in unexpected places that neither of us had anticipated. She'd bring me to gallery openings where I felt like an anthropologist studying an alien civilization, surrounded by people discussing artistic installations and wine pairings, while I tried not to accidentally offend anyone with my obvious lack of cultural sophistication and formal education in fine arts. I'd invite her to my engineering competitions, where she cheered more enthusiastically than anyone when my team achieved third place in the Regional Robotics Challenge, genuinely excited about technical accomplishments that most people found boring or incomprehensible. Her parents' disapproval functioned as constant background radiation in our relationship, invisible but always present, affecting everything around us in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. They stopped including her in family events when she insisted I be invited as her official +1. They reduced her monthly allowance significantly, hoping financial pressure would force her back into compliance with their long-term family planning. In response, she obtained her first employment ever, a part-time position at a contemporary art gallery downtown, earning minimum wage plus commission based on sales performance. She exhibited more pride in her first paycheck, totaling $247 after tax deductions, than she'd ever demonstrated regarding expensive gifts her father had purchased for birthdays, holidays, or academic achievements. But the countdown remained constantly present in our daily lives. 25 was approaching like a deadline for execution, each passing month bringing us closer to an impossible choice between love and financial security. Then her 24th birthday arrived like a storm system you can observe approaching but cannot avoid or prepare for adequately. Her parents organized a massive celebration at their estate in the hills overlooking the city, the kind of party that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries and required months of planning by professional event coordinators. I wasn't officially invited to attend, but Delilah insisted I accompany her as her chosen date, despite knowing it would create social tension thick enough to require industrial equipment to cut through. The guest list resembled a directory of the city's most influential families combined with a social register of generational wealth dynasties. I felt like an undercover operative infiltrating hostile territory, constantly worried someone would expose me as an imposter who didn't belong among people who casually discussed offshore investment strategies and vacation properties in multiple countries. Harrison was present naturally. Tall, handsome in ways that suggested superior genetics and expensive grooming throughout his life, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my combined tuition and textbook expenses for an entire semester. He approached us during the cocktail reception with supreme confidence characteristic of someone who'd never experienced rejection or failure in any aspect of his privileged existence. "Delilah," he said warmly, kissing her cheek with practiced familiarity that suggested he'd performed that exact greeting hundreds of times at similar social functions throughout their shared social circle. "You look absolutely stunning, as always." Then he turned toward me with eyes that appeared friendly on the surface, but felt like precision instruments designed for psychological warfare and social intimidation. "And you must be the coffee shop employee I've heard various people mention recently." "Engineer," I corrected, attempting to match his firm handshake without appearing weak or accidentally applying enough pressure to damage bones that might be important for his future legal career. "Of course," he replied. His smile possessed the sharpness of surgical instruments. "How is that career path working out from a financial perspective?" Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't result in my immediate removal from the party by security personnel, Delilah's father materialized beside our conversation as if he'd been monitoring our interaction and waiting for precisely this moment to intervene. "Harrison, how wonderful to see you again. I trust your father's law firm continues thriving despite current challenging economic conditions?" "Exceptionally well. Thank you for asking about our family business. We actually just secured the Morrison Industries account, which represents a significant expansion of our corporate law division and long-term growth potential." My blood transformed into liquid nitrogen. Morrison Industries represented the foundation of Delilah's family wealth, their business empire, the source of their power and influence throughout the city's economic ecosystem. Outstanding news for both our families. Her father responded with genuine pleasure that made his typically stern expression appear almost human. "Perhaps we should arrange dinner next week to discuss potential future collaborations that might benefit our mutual long-term strategic interests." He guided Harrison toward the bar area, leaving me standing alone with a champagne flute I couldn't afford to replace if my nervous hands caused an accident, surrounded by conversations about investment portfolios and real estate transactions that represented more money than I'd encountered during multiple lifetimes of engineering work. That's when Delilah's mother appeared beside me like an elegantly dressed ghost, wearing perfectly applied makeup and jewelry that probably cost more than my complete college education, including graduate school. "Are you enjoying our little celebration?" she inquired with artificial sweetness that tasted like chemical sugar substitutes. "It's a beautiful party. Thank you for including me. You know, Harrison has been asking about Delilah quite frequently during recent months. They share such wonderful history together from childhood, such natural compatibility in terms of family background and future expectations. She allowed that word to hang in the air between us like a threat wrapped in expensive French perfume. His family understands obligation and legacy, the critical importance of preserving what previous generations invested so much time and effort to build and maintain over decades of careful planning. Her eyes targeted mine with laser-guided precision. Some people are born to build empires and lead major industries. Others are born to serve those empires and support those leaders in subsidiary roles. Which category do you think applies to my situation? Her smile could have frozen champagne during the pouring process. I believe we both understand the answer to that question without requiring explicit clarification. The remainder of the party passed like a fever dream of forced conversations and careful navigation around topics that might reveal my complete unfamiliarity with their social and economic world. I observed Delilah working the room with practiced ease developed over years of similar events, switching seamlessly between groups of family friends and business associates, performing the role of perfect society daughter while occasionally glancing in my direction with expressions that seemed half apology, half desperation for rescue from social obligations she'd never chosen. Later that evening, as we drove through city streets in tense silence, the BMW's advanced climate control system humming quietly, while classical music played at barely audible volume through premium speakers, Delilah finally broke the oppressive quiet. They offered Harrison the Morrison Industries contract tonight during their private conversation, she said, her voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. I gathered that much from observing their interaction. The contract is worth $50 million over 5 years, with options for renewal and expansion into additional business divisions. I whistled softly despite the gravity of our situation. That represents serious money, life-changing financial opportunity. The contract comes with very specific conditions that were made crystal clear during their extended private discussion. My heart sank into my stomach like a stone thrown into deep water. What kind of conditions are we talking about? Harrison receives the contract if and only if he marries into the Morrison family within the next 18 months. Specifically, if he marries me and produces appropriate heirs to continue the family business legacy. The silence that followed felt dense enough to cause suffocation through atmospheric pressure. I stared out at city lights streaming past the window, each one representing individual lives and dreams and futures that suddenly seemed impossibly distant from anything I could realistically offer her. What response did you give them? Nothing definitive yet. They expect a final answer before the end of this month. That night, despite exhaustion from navigating social situations I was completely unprepared for, sleep remained impossible. I stood on my fire escape wearing boxers and a t-shirt, looking out at the urban landscape spread below like a circuit board of lights and possibilities, knowing I was about to lose the most important person who'd ever entered my life, the woman who laughed at my engineering jokes and stress calculation humor, who held my hand while I explained the mathematical beauty underlying perfectly designed load-bearing structures, who somehow saw something worth loving in me despite every rational reason to choose someone more financially and socially suitable. $50 million. That number echoed in my mind like a song stuck on infinite repeat. $50 million compared to a future with someone who made coffee for survival wages and lived above a commercial laundromat, whose biggest professional ambition involved landing an entry-level engineering position that might pay enough to afford a one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood. The following morning, Delilah appeared at the coffee shop during my opening shift, looking like she'd experienced the same sleepless night. Her usually perfect hair showed signs of restless tossing, her makeup was minimal, and dark circles under her eyes made her appear younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever witnessed. I need to ask you something critically important, she said, settling onto one of our mismatched bar stools that I'd inherited from the previous business owner. Ask away. If I walk away from everything, all the money, family connections, and lifestyle I've known since birth, what exactly am I walking toward? I stopped wiping down the counter and looked at her directly, recognizing this as the most serious conversation we'd ever had about our future together. What do you mean specifically? I mean, what's your realistic 5-year plan? Your 10-year plan? What kind of life can you actually provide? She paused to gather her thoughts. Because sacrificing $50 million requires a pretty compelling alternative future to justify such an enormous financial loss. She was absolutely correct. I possess dreams and ambitions, but no concrete roadmap for achieving them. Hope and determination, but no family trust fund to provide security if my plans didn't develop exactly as anticipated. I graduate in 6 months with my mechanical engineering degree and specialization in sustainable energy systems, I said carefully, selecting each word with precision. I have interviews scheduled with 3 different firms. Starting salary will probably range around $65K, maybe $70K if I negotiate skillfully and demonstrate exceptional value. $65,000, she repeated, testing how that number sounded when spoken aloud compared to the millions she was considering abandoning. I know it's not impressive compared to your current lifestyle, but it represents honest work solving real problems that affect people's lives. And in 5 years, if I prove competent at engineering and project management, maybe I'll be earning $90K or $100K as a senior engineer. I was getting carried away, painting pictures of a future that felt simultaneously achievable and completely fantastical. In 10 years, maybe I'll establish my own consulting firm specializing in sustainable engineering solutions for environmental problems. Maybe we'll own a house in a safe neighborhood with a yard large enough for children to play safely. Maybe we'll take annual vacations to places we spend all year saving money to visit. Maybe we'll have 2 reliable cars and college savings accounts for our kids. And I trailed off because tears were rolling down her cheeks while she stared at the scratched surface of our counter that had seen thousands of coffee cups and conversations. "That sounds absolutely perfect," she whispered. "That sounds like everything I actually want from life." But I could see fear in her eyes, the overwhelming magnitude of what she'd be sacrificing, the uncertainty of abandoning guaranteed financial security for a future that depended entirely on my ability to build something meaningful from nothing. 3 days later, her father called me directly on my personal phone number that I definitely never provided to him through any normal means. "We need to have an immediate conversation," he said without preamble or polite social conventions. "My office at Morrison Industries, 1 hour from now." This wasn't a request or invitation. It was a summons. Morrison Industries occupied the top 3 floors of the city's tallest building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that dominated the downtown skyline like a monument to corporate power. The marble lobby alone probably cost more than most people's complete houses, featuring crystal chandeliers and original artwork that belonged in major museums rather than corporate headquarters. I felt microscopic walking through that space wearing my best shoes, which were still scuffed work boots that had endured too many construction sites and weekend labor jobs. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to meet some corporate deity who controlled mortal destinies from his glass-enclosed throne room high above the city. Her father's office was larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding views of the urban landscape spread below, like a personal kingdom he surveyed each morning, while drinking coffee that probably cost more per cup than I earned per hour of work. "Sit," he commanded without looking up from documents that probably represented more financial transactions than I could comprehend or calculate properly. I settled into a leather chair more comfortable than my bed and probably worth more than my monthly rent, utilities, and grocery expenses combined. "You're going to terminate your relationship with my daughter immediately. Today." "Excuse me?" "You heard me with perfect clarity. End the relationship. Make it final and convincing enough that she won't attempt to contact you afterward." "And why would I agree to do that?" He finally looked directly at me with eyes the same color as Delilah's, but completely lacking any warmth or humanity I'd ever observed in her expressions. "Because if you refuse to comply, I will systematically destroy any possibility you have of building a career in engineering. I will ensure you never work in your chosen profession anywhere in this city, this state, or anywhere in this country. You can't possibly accomplish that level of professional destruction." He smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever witnessed on a human face. Not because it showed anger or cruelty, but because it demonstrated complete calm confidence in his ability to ruin my life without significant effort. "Son, I own controlling financial interests in half the engineering firms in this metropolitan area. The other half depend on contracts from companies I control directly or influence through business relationships I've cultivated over 30 years of strategic networking." He leaned back in his executive chair, completely relaxed, like we were discussing weather patterns instead of my entire professional future. "One phone call from me, and your engineering degree becomes worthless paper suitable only for starting fires. Every interview you have scheduled will result in polite rejections with vague explanations. Every job application you submit will disappear into filing systems never to be reviewed by human eyes." He paused to allow that threat to fully penetrate my understanding. "However, I'm not an unreasonable businessman. I believe in providing viable alternatives to problems I create. If you walk away from Delilah immediately, cleanly, convincingly, permanently, I will personally ensure you receive an excellent position with Meridian Engineering." He extracted a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across the enormous mahogany surface between us. "They're launching a revolutionary sustainable energy division in Seattle. $85,000 starting salary, comprehensive benefits package, clear advancement opportunities to senior engineer within 3 years if you demonstrate adequate performance. Seattle. 3,000 miles away from Delilah and everything we'd built together over the past year. The position represents exactly what you've claimed to want. Sustainable engineering, green technology innovation, opportunities to make meaningful environmental impact while building a successful career. All I have to do is abandon the woman I love and disappear from her life forever. All you have to do is accept reality and make a mature decision about your future. Tell her you received an irresistible career opportunity. Make it believable and final. Then remove yourself from her life permanently so she can fulfill her family obligations. And if I refuse your generous offer, then you'll spend the rest of your life serving coffee and wondering what could have been while you watch her marry Harrison Wellington and produce the heirs our family business requires for continuity." He opened the folder to reveal official Meridian Engineering letterhead and a complete job offer already signed by their CEO, requiring only my signature to become legally binding. "This offer expires in exactly 1 hour. After that, both the opportunity and your engineering career disappear forever, and Delilah still marries Harrison because that's her only viable option for maintaining her lifestyle and family relationships." I stared at the papers without touching them, my hands trembling slightly. The salary exceeded anything I'd dreamed of earning straight out of college. The position was literally everything I'd told Delilah I wanted to achieve someday. Meaningful work that could make a difference in the world. The company was internationally respected for innovative renewable energy research. She'll never forgive you when she discovers this conversation took place. She'll never discover it happened. And eventually, she'll thank me for saving her from a life of financial struggle and social irrelevance that would have made her miserable within 5 years of marriage to someone like you. You're underestimating your daughter's strength and independence. I'm protecting my daughter from making the biggest mistake of her life based on temporary romantic emotions, rather than long-term rational planning for her future security and happiness. I looked out his windows at the city below, trying to locate the neighborhood where Delilah was probably working at her gallery job, earning minimum wage and discovering what it felt like to work for something she wanted instead of simply accepting gifts handed to her. How do I know you'll honor your commitment about the job? Because destroying you serves no useful purpose once you're no longer a threat to my family's long-term plans. I'm a businessman focused on results, not a sadist who enjoys causing unnecessary suffering. Remove yourself from the equation, and you become completely irrelevant to my concerns. That evening, I called Delilah and asked her to meet me at our special location, a bench overlooking the river where we'd shared our first kiss after that financially disastrous dinner that had cost me every dollar I owned, but had been worth the economic devastation to see her genuine happiness. She arrived breathless and excited, carrying takeout from the Thai restaurant we discovered during one of our explorations of budget-friendly date options when I was between paychecks and couldn't afford anything expensive. I've been thinking constantly about our conversation from this morning, she began before I could speak. About the suburbs and the kids and the normal middle-class life. I want that future more than anything. I want it with you. My heart disintegrated into fragments so small I wasn't sure they would ever reassemble properly. Delilah, I said, my voice barely functioning as a communication device. I received a job offer today. Her face illuminated like Christmas morning, New Year's fireworks, and her birthday celebration combined into one moment of pure joy and excitement. That's incredible news. Which firm made the offer? Is it one of the local companies you've been interviewing with? Meridian Engineering, their new sustainable energy division in Seattle. The light died in her eyes so quickly, I felt like I'd physically struck her with something heavy and metallic. Seattle? That's on the opposite side of the entire country. It's an amazing opportunity that represents everything I've been working toward academically. Senior engineer track from the first day, salary that exceeds my wildest expectations. I forced myself to continue the lie that was destroying both our hearts simultaneously. It's everything I've dreamed about professionally since I started studying engineering. How long have you known about this opportunity? The interview was last week when I told you I was meeting with study groups for final exams. They called this afternoon with a formal offer that requires an immediate response. She studied my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a mathematical equation, searching for clues that would make sense of information that felt fundamentally wrong on every level. When do they expect you to relocate and begin working? 2 weeks from today. She remained silent for so long I started to think she wasn't going to respond at all. Cars passed on the street behind us carrying people to destinations unknown. The river flowed past our bench, carrying leaves and debris toward the ocean. Finally, she spoke in a voice so quiet, I had to lean forward to hear properly. This is really what you want for your future? No, you're what I want. You're everything I want. You're worth more than any career, any salary, any professional achievement I could accomplish without you sharing those successes. It's what I need to do for my long-term career development and financial stability. She nodded slowly, but I could see she didn't believe me completely. Not the way I needed her to if this deception was going to accomplish its intended purpose. I could see the hurt and confusion and that desperate hope that I would suddenly laugh and tell her it was all some terrible misunderstanding, that I'd choose her over everything else. I understand your decision, she said quietly, but she didn't understand. How could she comprehend when I couldn't tell her the truth without destroying her relationship with her family forever and forcing her to choose between love and the security she'd known since birth? I love you, she said, and it emerged like a question she was afraid to ask. I love you too, but not enough to stay and fight for our relationship. I couldn't answer that question. Couldn't explain that sometimes loving someone means protecting them from choices that would ruin their entire life, even when making that protective choice destroys your own heart in the process. We sat in silence for another 2 hours, watching the river flow past, both of us knowing this was goodbye, but neither wanting to be the first person to say that word aloud. 2 weeks later, I was on an airplane to Seattle carrying luggage that contained my entire life, heading toward a job I'd never applied for, accepting a salary that felt like payment for betraying everything I believed in, nursing a broken heart that I knew would never heal properly. I stared out the small airplane window as we lifted off, watching the city shrink until I couldn't distinguish individual buildings anymore, until everything we'd built together became just another collection of lights disappearing in the darkness below. For 5 years, I threw myself into work with the desperate intensity of someone trying to outrun his own memories and regrets. Made senior engineer in record time by working 75-hour weeks and volunteering for every difficult project other engineers wanted to avoid. Led the development of 3 revolutionary wind turbine designs that were implemented in renewable energy installations across the Pacific Northwest and internationally. Purchased a house with panoramic views of Mount Rainier that would have impressed even Delilah's parents with its architectural details and expensive finishes. I had achieved everything I told her I dreamed of accomplishing someday, except for the one person I'd wanted to share those achievements with. I followed her life through social media until the emotional pain became unbearable, and I had to stop for my own psychological health. The engagement announcement to Harrison, featuring photographs of smiling faces and champagne toasts at another country club gathering that looked identical to her birthday party, where I'd watched their business transaction disguised as romance play out in real time. The wedding photos appeared like something from a luxury lifestyle magazine. Her wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my car's total purchase price. Him in his perfectly tailored tuxedo that had probably been custom made by craftsmen whose waiting list stretched for months. Both of them looking like professional actors playing carefully rehearsed roles in someone else's meticulously planned production. They looked happy in those photographs. Or at least, she appeared to be trying very hard to convince herself and everyone observing that she was happy, which might have been the same thing from the perspective of people who didn't know her well enough to recognize the subtle differences in her expressions. I deleted all my social media accounts after those wedding photos appeared online, started dating other women, intelligent, accomplished professionals who deserved better than someone still completely in love with a ghost from his past, built a successful consulting firm specializing in sustainable energy systems and environmental engineering, made a respectable name for myself in renewable technology circles, lived what anyone observing from outside would consider a very successful life that felt completely hollow at its emotional core. Last month, I received a phone call from Trevor, my old roommate from college who still lived in our hometown, and occasionally provided updates about people we'd known during university. "Dude, you absolutely need to see what's happening with Morrison Industries," he said without any preamble, his voice containing the kind of excitement that suggested major drama was unfolding in spectacular fashion. What kind of situation should I be aware of? Massive financial scandal that's making national business news. It's dominating every financial network, front page of major newspapers, trending across every social media platform. The entire Morrison business empire is collapsing in the most spectacular way imaginable. My body temperature dropped several degrees. What kind of financial scandal are we discussing? Harrison Morrison. And get this, he legally changed his surname after the wedding ceremony. Can you believe that level of audacity? Turns out he's been systematically embezzling from Morrison Industries for years. Fake construction contracts, offshore shell companies, manipulated accounting records, forged invoices, the complete white-collar criminal enterprise. I sat down heavily in my home office chair. How much money are we talking about? Current federal investigations suggest somewhere between $18 and $25 million over 4 years of systematic theft. He's facing serious federal prison time, probably 20 to 30 years if convicted on all charges. The FBI has enough evidence to file charges under multiple federal statutes. My mind raced through possibilities. And Delilah? That's the absolutely incredible part of this entire story. She's the one who discovered the embezzlement, gathered all the evidence, and turned him into federal authorities. I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. She, what exactly? Filed for divorce and handed over boxes and boxes of financial documentation to the FBI. Apparently, she'd been conducting her own private investigation for months, maybe even longer. Bank records, recorded conversations, digital evidence, forged signatures, the complete case file. She built an absolutely airtight prosecution case against her own husband. My heart started beating again for the first time in 5 years. The news reports are calling her a hero whistleblower who sacrificed her personal comfort to expose corporate fraud. Some legal experts think her evidence might be strong enough to help federal authorities recover most of the stolen money and potentially save the family business from complete bankruptcy. After I hung up, I sat in my perfectly appointed living room with its expensive furniture and carefully curated art collection, staring out at the Seattle skyline, wondering if some mistakes could ever be forgiven. If some stories were designed to include second chapters, if the universe occasionally provided opportunities to correct the worst decisions you'd ever made. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number with a familiar area code from my hometown. "I heard through mutual college friends that you might be living in Seattle these days. I'm flying there tomorrow for business meetings. Something about sustainable energy consulting contracts for a new art gallery. Imagine the coincidence. Would you be interested in getting coffee? I promise not to order anything complicated that requires advanced barista skills or expensive ingredients." Di stared at that message for over an hour, reading it dozens of times, analyzing every word choice for hidden meanings or signs that this might be some kind of cosmic practical joke designed to test my emotional resilience after years of regret. Finally, I typed back, "I know a place that serves decent coffee and doesn't charge premium prices. Same terrible jokes about engineering principles and thermodynamics, but the espresso machine actually functions reliably now." She responded within minutes. "Perfect. Fair warning though. I've spent the last few years learning to make my own coffee, manage my own finances, and run my own business. You might discover you have some serious competition in multiple areas." The next day, I stood in the coffee shop I'd selected near Pike Place Market, a small, locally owned establishment that reminded me of where we'd first met all those years ago. My hands were shaking worse than they had that first time I'd worked up courage to ask her out, when the biggest risk was potential embarrassment, rather than the possibility of reopening emotional wounds that had never properly healed. She walked through the door wearing jeans and a sweater that looked expensive but understated, her hair shorter than I remembered, styled in a way that suggested she'd learned to manage her own appearance rather than relying on professional stylists and beauty consultants. She looked older, more serious, but there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before during our original relationship. Confidence, maybe. Or the kind of inner peace that comes from making difficult decisions and accepting their consequences. "Hi," she said simply, and her voice was exactly the same as it had been in my memories and dreams. "Hi yourself." We ordered coffee. She requested the same complicated oat milk latte she'd always preferred. I got plain black coffee because my hands were too unsteady for anything requiring coordination or fine motor skills. "You look good," she said as we sat at a corner table away from other customers. "Seattle clearly agrees with your overall constitution and lifestyle. You look free." She laughed, and it was the exact same sound I'd fallen in love with 7 years earlier. Free is exactly the right word to describe my current situation. Do you have any idea what it feels like to discover your entire adult life has been constructed on lies and financial manipulation? I might have some relevant experience with that particular concept. She tilted her head slightly, studying my expression with renewed interest. Meaning, what exactly? This was the moment I'd been simultaneously dreading and hoping for since the day I'd abandoned everything we'd built together. The opportunity to tell the complete truth about what had really happened, why I'd made the choice that had destroyed both our lives. Your father didn't just approve of my job offer with Meridian Engineering, he arranged it personally, threatened to destroy my entire engineering career if I didn't accept the position and disappear from your life permanently. Her face went through several distinct emotions in rapid succession: confusion, realization, anger, and something that might have been relief mixed with vindication. He did what? I told her everything. The intimidating meeting in his office with its commanding view of the city below, the explicit threats about ruining my professional future before it could begin, the impossible choice between her happiness and my career survival, how I'd convinced myself that loving her meant protecting her from a life of financial struggle and family warfare, even if it meant sacrificing our relationship and my own happiness. By the time I finished explaining, she was crying, but not in the way I'd expected. Not tears of sadness or betrayal, but something that looked almost like laughter mixed with frustration and long-suppressed anger. "You complete and utter idiot," she said, but she was smiling through her tears. "I was trying to protect you from making a decision you might regret later. I didn't need protection from my own choices and decisions. I needed someone who believed I was strong enough and intelligent enough to make difficult decisions and live with their consequences regardless of external pressure." She reached across the small table and took my hand. "Do you want to know what actually happened after you disappeared from my life?" I nodded, not trusting my voice to work properly. I was completely devastated emotionally, absolutely destroyed, but also deeply suspicious about the circumstances. The timing of your job offer was too convenient, too perfectly aligned with my family's interests and long-term plans, too neat a solution to what they obviously saw as their Delilah problem. She squeezed my fingers gently, so I did what any trust fund baby with unlimited financial resources and too much time on her hands would do in that situation. I hired a private investigator to look into your sudden career opportunity and geographic relocation. My stomach dropped like an elevator with severed cables. "You knew about the coercion? I've known about Dad's meeting with you, about Meridian Engineering, about everything for 5 years. The investigator was extremely thorough and very discreet in gathering evidence. Why didn't you ever contact me directly? Why didn't you... What was I supposed to do realistically? Fly to Seattle and demand you choose me again after you'd already made your decision to prioritize career over relationship? Show up at your new job and cause a dramatic scene that would have gotten you fired and ruined the career you'd sacrificed our love to protect?" She shook her head. "You'd made your choice, even if it was based on coercion and threats I didn't know about at the time. I made the wrong choice completely. Maybe you did make the wrong choice, or maybe we both needed those years apart to become the people we were supposed to be before we could build something real and lasting together." She told me about the last 7 years in comprehensive detail, how she'd married Harrison partly to spite me for leaving, partly because following her family's predetermined plan seemed easier than continuing to fight against expectations that felt immovable and overwhelming. How their marriage had been polite and comfortable and completely hollow from the very beginning, like a business arrangement disguised as a romantic relationship. How she'd gradually noticed discrepancies in Morrison Industries' financial reports that didn't make logical sense. Contracts for construction work that was never actually completed. Payments to companies that didn't seem to exist when she researched them independently. Offshore transactions that violated several federal regulations regarding corporate financial transparency and tax obligations. "I could have stayed silent about what I discovered," she said. "Gotten divorced quietly, accepted my settlement from the prenuptial agreement, lived comfortably on what remained of my trust fund after the legal proceedings concluded. Why didn't you take that safer option? Because you taught me something critically important during the year we were together. That some principles are worth fighting for, even when fighting costs you everything you thought you wanted from life." The investigation and subsequent legal proceedings had cost her almost everything she'd known since childhood. Most of the Morrison family fortune was gone, either seized by federal authorities as evidence or tied up in legal proceedings that might continue for years. Her parents had completely disowned her for betraying family loyalty and exposing their business to criminal prosecution. Most of her old social circle had disappeared when the money and social status evaporated. "But I kept my gallery job," she said with unmistakable pride. "Worked my way up from part-time minimum wage to assistant manager, then regional coordinator for multiple locations. I'm opening my own gallery next month, specializing in local artists and sustainable art practices that don't harm the environment. Here in Seattle, funny thing about art galleries, they can be located anywhere. There are people who appreciate creativity and beauty and want to support local artists." We talked until the coffee shop closed for the evening, then walked along the waterfront as the sun set over Elliott Bay, painting the sky in colors that would have made beautiful artwork themselves. Everything felt simultaneously familiar and completely new, like returning to a childhood home that had been renovated but still contained the essential elements that made it feel like belonging. "I have one question that's been bothering me for years," she said, as we stood at the railing looking out at the water. "When my father gave you that ultimatum, why didn't you fight for me? Why didn't you tell me what was happening and let me make my own informed decision about what our relationship was worth?" It was the question I'd been asking myself every single day for 7 years without finding a satisfactory answer. Because I was 22 and terrified of making the wrong choice that might ruin both our lives. Because I thought love meant sacrifice and protection, rather than partnership and trust. Because I didn't understand that sometimes the right decision is the difficult one that requires courage, not the one that seems safest for everyone involved in the short term. And now I understand that Harrison could promise your family lucrative business contracts, and your parents could threaten severe consequences, but they all missed the most important thing about Delilah Morrison, which was, you were never out of my league. I was just playing by completely wrong rules, she smiled. What rules should you have been following? The rules that say love isn't about what you can provide financially or socially, but about who you choose to become when someone believes in your potential and supports your dreams. 6 months later, she moved to Seattle permanently. Her gallery opened to outstanding reviews in local art publications and online platforms, featuring emerging Pacific Northwest artists and pioneering innovative approaches to sustainable art creation and exhibition that minimized environmental impact. We took our second chance slowly this time, building something solid and real instead of dramatic and desperate. A year after our coffee shop reunion, I proposed with a ring I could actually afford without bankrupting myself, at the same waterfront location where we'd walked during our first conversation about second chances and forgiveness. She said yes before I finished asking the question. We were married on a beach at sunset, surrounded by the family we'd chosen rather than the families we'd been born into. No country club venue, no predetermined guest list based on social status, no inheritance or business empire hanging over our celebration like a sword. Just two people who'd learned that sometimes you have to lose everything you think you want to discover what really matters. Her father attempted to attend the wedding ceremony uninvited. Security personnel we'd hired escorted him away when Delilah made it crystal clear he wasn't welcome to participate in our happiness after working so hard to prevent it years earlier. Her mother sent a greeting card with no return address and no signature. But my parents were there, proud and emotional about their son's happiness. My engineering colleagues from multiple firms. The owners and regular customers from 3 different coffee shops where we'd spent countless hours talking about our dreams and plans. Our chosen family, people who knew our complete story and loved us, not despite our mistakes, but because of how we'd learned from them and grown stronger. During our first dance to music we'd selected ourselves, Delilah whispered in my ear, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd refused my father's ultimatum and stayed to fight for our relationship? Every single day for 7 years. Me too. But I think we ended up exactly where we were supposed to be, even if we took the longest and most painful possible route to get here." She was absolutely right. Sometimes the scenic route teaches you things about yourself and your destination that the direct path never could have provided. These days, when people ask how I ended up with someone like her, someone supposedly so far above my theoretical social league, I tell them the complete truth. I didn't win her over with money or family connections or smooth-talking charm or any kind of manipulation. I won her over by becoming someone worth coming back to, someone who'd learned that real love means trusting your partner to make their own choices, even when those choices involve personal sacrifice and difficult consequences. And when the game you're playing is love, that's the only strategy that actually works for building something lasting. The Morrison Industries scandal made national financial news for months. Harrison received a 25-year federal prison sentence with no possibility of parole for the first 12 years. Most of the stolen money was recovered through asset seizure and used to pay back defrauded investors and creditors. The remaining Morrison business operations were sold to pay legal fees and restitution. Delilah and I used our combined savings to start a sustainable engineering consulting firm that specializes in environmentally responsible construction projects and renewable energy installations. She handles business development, client relations, and project management. I design the technical systems and oversee implementation. We're building something together that neither of us could have created alone, solving real problems while supporting local artists through gallery exhibitions. Sometimes I receive calls from young engineers asking for career advice. I always tell them the same thing. Technical skills will get you hired, but integrity will determine whether you sleep well at night. And if someone ever offers you everything you think you want in exchange for giving up someone you love, remember that the best deals often come with the highest hidden costs that aren't apparent until years later. Delilah was never out of my league. I was just afraid to play in hers. But fear isn't a good foundation for life decisions. Love is.